Welcome to Shadowlight Hearth, a world-class inn and rest stop for weary travelers who make their way to the distant fantasy city of Jarnia. Hi there, this is Victus. Before we talk more about my inn, I want to first pull back the curtain and tell you something a little personal. See, despite having the temerity to be a Minecraft YouTuber myself, I have always been an exceptionally untalented artist. For my entire life, I have struggled in all matters of art, and Minecraft building is, at bottom, art. Runculus, my partner for this channel, is a natural artist. He's been a good builder in Minecraft ever since he basically started playing. But me, I've built more than my fair share of lifeless square boxes to stave off dark nights and the terrors that lie beyond outside. Now, 15 years later, I think I'm a decent builder, if you'll allow me to say so. I'm still not a natural. I'll never be a natural. But I'm here to tell you that people like me, and perhaps like you, do not have to be naturals to still find success making builds that we can really be proud of. And you would be surprised to know how much of it comes down to our headspace and perhaps some smart theoretical preparation. This video is not a color theory video. It's not about mastering depth or meshing textures. Those are all great things to know, and there are a great many good guides out there. But I think especially if you're a newer builder or a novice builder, you might find that these headspace tips help you as much as they help me. Step 1, ask yourself, what is the build's lore or story or purpose? Our first step in this process is a question. What is this structure or build? What is its in-game utility or function, if any? What is the story or lore function, if any? Let's return to Shadowlight Hearth to demonstrate what the process looks like for me. Jarnia is 5,000 blocks east of our main base and capital city of Vinland. That's no small hike. While Vinland is more of a historical and grounded sort of city, focusing on a fusion of Roman and Nordic builds, Jarnia is a fantastical place. A mesh of old-growth birch and dark oak, with giant mushrooms adorning the island, surrounded on all sides by a fantastical-looking valley. This place is surreal, magical, a little bit alien, and more than a little bit dangerous for any intrepid Vinlandian explorer who makes their way out this far. So I knew that my very first build should be an inn for such weary travelers. Because of the city's natural beauty and the whimsy of the fantasy magic that this city's inhabitants have access to, my goals for this build were to make it simultaneously luxurious and cozy. Let's make this make sense in context. What this meant in practice was that as I was placing blocks and framing rooms, I kept asking myself, is this fancy enough? And is it cozy enough? Would road-weary travelers be willing to drop hard-earned coin to rest here? That was my first North Star while I was building this place. The more of these questions you can ask and answer while conceptualizing your next build, the easier the build process will be. Step 2. What is the build's theme? Unlike step 1, this is where we're going to start getting a little bit more practical in the theory of our build. What motif do I want to go for with this build? For me, this was pretty easy to solve. As a general rule, when I'm doing wood builds, I try to use lumber from the trees that are native or neighboring to the area in which I'm building. I don't always do this, but I try to do it as much as I can, and that is exactly what I did here. The native trees to this area are birch and dark oak, and it struck me how beautiful the white and black trees fused in this area to give it a light-dark motif. I wanted to take dark and light and make it the theme of this entire build, and that's where my name for it, Shadowlight Hearth, was born. So now I know that my primary elements for all of this building are going to either be dark oak or birch. Those would be the blocks that I needed to stock up on, and the blocks that I would default to as much as possible while placing my blocks during the build. Step 3. Have constraints. It might sound counterintuitive, but oftentimes there is strength in simplicity, and having constraints can aid in making a better build. Minecraft has a lot of blocks to choose from. Frankly, it can be a little overwhelming. Setting constraints at the outset can be clarifying and even liberating. Runculus is even better at this than I am, but I personally try to limit my primary blocks to as small of a pool as possible. For me at least, it helps me focus. The constraints here were pretty simple. Like I already said, I usually use native lumber and I want a light and dark motif, so my primary elements would be birch and dark oak. Because I want it to be cozy, I wanted to use as much lumber as possible and as little stone and harder materials as possible. But I also wanted it to be luxurious, so I wanted open floor plans for the common areas with big glass storefront windows to flex the wealth of this building. Luxurious also translated into fewer, nicer rooms, each adorned with their very own walkout porches. Again, I want to limit my use of stone as much as possible. Step 4. Strategically break your own rules. I just told you that having constraints is valuable, clarifying, and helps you along, didn't I? I did. Now I'm going to tell you that sometimes you will want to bend those rules. Constraints are not meant to be absolutes. Of course I used a type of brick for my fireplace. Deep slate seemed appropriate here to go dark with the warm fire. Light and dark. Shadowlight, remember? And I used a bit more on the huge section of the building's face to break up the pattern and add a bit of fancifulness to the front. This is all part of the theory. When you have a constraint, a block and color palette that you religiously adhere to, and then you purposefully break it on selective areas, that is the way that you can give more emphasis to those areas. To me, those areas included the hearths, it's in the building's name, the furniture, for which I opted for a deep mangrove red, and the face of the building, as I described previously. A consciously broken constraint can be the best way to create a highlight when it is done with care. Step 5. Actually, before we talk about step 5, I just want you to observe that you can accomplish the entirety of the first 4 steps in this video before you even lay a single block. Especially when you're in a creative rut, I call it builder's block. Sometimes slowing down to ask yourself some questions and building constraints can help you break through. I do this with all of my builds personally. I stop and ask myself what my goals are and how I imagine fitting everything together to hit the theme that I'm aiming for. Back on track, step 5 is to lay blocks and ask questions later. You've decided on your building's utility and thematics, you've assigned the necessary constraints and blocks and color palettes, and all that's left is to start placing blocks, and you might still be thinking, now what? Now you place blocks. How, you ask? Just place blocks. I'm not about to tell you that technique is not a thing, or that understanding some of the building basics, such as laying out a reasonable frame or building all walls to be an odd block count if you want center points, aren't things either. But what's more important than all of that, when overcoming builder's block especially, is just laying blocks. To bolster the theory here, let me provide some non-Minecraft theory that might help. First, there's a TED Talk by Tom Wujek who ran dozens of experiments that he called the marshmallow experiment. Simply put, assembled teams are given spaghetti, tape, string, and a big marshmallow, and they are tasked with building the tallest possible structure with the marshmallow on top without it collapsing, and all to be done within the timeline of 18 minutes. The notorious finding of this study is that kindergartners, yes, kindergartners, are one of the best performing groups, outperforming business graduates, median adults, and even groups of CEOs. I'll link the talk in the description, but the punchline of this whole thing is the why. Why do kindergartners perform so well? Well, adult groups have a tendency to spend most of their time planning, power struggling within the group dynamic, debating and deliberating, and when the time's almost up and it comes time to actually assemble, they take a huge risk and oftentimes end up failing, and their structure collapses. Kindergartners, by contrast, spend none of their time doing that. They instead spend spend 100% of their time just building and prototyping until they get something that works. The takeaway here is that you can compensate for skill with practice and repetition. Prototype your build. The second example comes from James Clear's best-selling book, Atomic Habits. Clear tells a story of a University of Florida photography class. On the first day of class, the professor divided the group of students into two groups. Group A was the quantity group and would be graded entirely on the amount of photos they produced. Group B was the quality group, graded solely on the excellence of their work. They only needed to produce one photo, but it needed to be as perfect as possible to get the highest score. To quote Clear directly, "At the end of the term, the professor was surprised to find that all the best photos were produced by the quantity group. During the semester, these students were busy taking photos, experimenting with composition and lighting, testing out various methods in the darkroom, and learning from their mistakes. In the process of creating hundreds of photos, they honed their skills. Meanwhile, the quality group sat around speculating about perfection. In the end, they had little to show for their efforts other than unverified theories and one mediocre photo." Guys, the point here is simple. Practice is your best teacher. You can get better at building, just like I did, but there's no substitute for elbow grease. Place those blocks, prototype, and learn from your mistakes. If you found this build theory guide helpful, consider giving us a like and a subscribe. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll catch you in the next one. Victus, signing off.